Welcome back to GM Talks. I'm Keegan. My lovely assistant Brennan could not join us. He was stuck at work, so we're going to just have a nice interview with Josh Heath. Josh Heath runs Werewolf the Podcast, as well as is a member of High Level Games. I met him at a Gen Con last year and met him at the Grand Masquerade in 2016, I believe.
That's right. I'd actually forgotten that we met at Grand Masquerade. So thanks for bringing that memory back.
No problem. Oh, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here and chat, and I always like talking to you. So it's definitely going to be a good time.
Yeah. So I'll start with Brennan. Brennan sent me some questions for you, actually. His first question is pretty straightforward, almost. Kind of a standard these days is, do you prefer to play or do you prefer to run your games?
That is such a good question, and it's such a hard one to answer because in some ways I love to always be the GM, creating the world, knowing the mechanics, doing all of the kind of back-end work is something that I enjoy because I always feel like I need to be involved in some way. But then when I get the chance to be a player in a game that's run by a good GM or a good storyteller, it's always an enlightening experience because I'm learning things from them and I'm getting a chance to just kind of be there and bask in the entire element of the game. So I would say I really enjoy doing both, but I'd probably lean towards enjoying being the storyteller or the GM more than anything.
I'd have to agree. I do prefer storytelling, though when I get to play, usually at Gen Con, I go ham. Full ham.
Yeah. And I think that's the way to do it. If you're going to play, like, just lean into it and be the player that you want to have all your players be at the table.
One of my players, actually, for the Werewolf game, Riley, she ran a D&D game for me for my birthday. And she's like, just invite the friends you want. And so I invited my other regular player, Michael, who is like my go-to on all questions crunch.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty crunch savvy. I'm not nearly as crunch savvy as him. And so we both built monstrosities because she's like, level 15. And we're like, okay.
Oh, awesome.
And so I was a warlock with like a wand of fireball. And I built him to the point where he had like a plus, I think it was like a plus 12 to his Eldritch Blast to hit.
Wow.
And you could tell she was just like, oh, okay. I also did the really, really cheap trick with Warlocks where you can do push and pull with the Eldritch Blast by pushing something 5 feet and pulling it 5 feet. And when you level up, you actually roll multiple times for Eldritch Blast, and each one's a separate hit. So I did Cloud of Daggers on a giant, which automatically did a certain amount of damage. Then I did Eldritch Blast to pull him out. Then Eldritch Blast to push him in, which automatically triggers more damage.
That is amazing. It's funny because people say, "Oh, 5e isn't. You can't be as munchkin-y in 5e as you could in 3.5 or anything like that." And I'm like, no, you can be if you really try hard at it. It is very possible.
Mine is. The most munchkin-y person is going to be better than someone who didn't optimize. Mm-hmm. But if you have a group of munchkins and non-munchkins, the power discrepancy is at least small enough to where the non-munchkins don't feel useless.
That's totally true. That is an advantage of 5e, is it's designed so even if you don't intentionally know or even don't know how to maximize your character in one way or another, you're still going to feel like a hero. So that's always a good thing.
Yeah, I really like that about it overall. I do like some of the hardcore hacks to make it a little more OSR-y.
What sort of things are you thinking about?
There's two books that I really like. One is a modification for. Are you familiar with Harn World or Harm?
Oh, only really obliquely. I know of it, but I've never gotten a chance to read any of it or play any of it. So okay. I know of it.
I read the character creation section, and it like takes you several hours, and you can die in your first combat and not even from combat. You might get a wound in combat and then die of an infection later in the session.
Oh, well, at least that's realistic, I suppose.
It's It is touted as one of the most realistic RPGs, at least in terms of that part of it. Like, it has whole things about trade disputes, trade routes, things like that, how things affect the economy. So it's like built for that. But like, that is usually how I see it is high lethality games should come with easy, fast character creation.
Right. It sounds like that is long character creation and lethal combat.
Yep, and it's high lethality, which I get to some degree, but because the more realistic a game is, the more crunchy it is.
Sure.
But they do cool things. There's a free 5e conversion where it gives you rules for morale, mass damage, lingering injuries, last chance kind of stuff, how to make morale checks, and then it also has things like a level cap and some other really cool stuff to make the game feel a little more dangerous.
That all sounds cool. It sounds like something to dig into. And you said it was free, so
yeah,
I might have to go out and look for it.
And the other one is from a guy called Runehammer Games. He did the index card RPG. He used to do something called Drinkins and Dragons, where he'd bring out like his little notebook pretending to have whiskey, or actually drinking whiskey. Kind of hard to tell.
Right.
And he did that. He wrote D&D 5e hardcore mode. And that has things like you have to roll to cast, but you don't have spell slots anymore. But if you fail to cast, you lose the spell for the day. Along with like critical failure charts for your spells. And then it was roll for HP every level, including first level. So you could start with like 1 HP.
Oh, ouch. That makes sense, though. That's like a slightly hardcore rule, but I got so used to doing that in the 3.0 era that it doesn't shock me too much.
Yeah, exactly. And they're cool little hacks and things like that. And then, of course, both of them have a short rest is an 8-hour rest, and a long rest is you have to wait a week.
Ooh, wow.
Yeah.
That definitely makes things a lot more difficult if you're a caster with all those, rest requirements.
Well, that's part of the reason why they had the roll to cast, so you don't have slots anymore.
That makes sense. Yeah, that I guess balances out a little bit.
Yeah, my favorite OSR-ish game though is still Dungeon Crawl Classics.
I keep hearing good things about it, and I honestly need to play it at one of these at a convention or one of these days, because I hear good things, and I do enjoy a good dungeon crawl OSR experience. So
yeah, it's a lot of fun. The funnel is like one of my favorite elements of the game. Easily one of my favorites, because it's basically you roll up 3 to 5 random characters, completely randomized at level 0, and whoever makes it to the end of the adventure, it's like, congratulations, you're level 1.
That's awesome. That is a great way of going about it. Like, all right, you've survived all of these, horrible things. Now you are a basic level character. Yeah,
it's kind of great. It does do the race class thing where elves are a class in that one, which I know modern RPGs are rightfully drifting away from, but there's a certain charm to it still, I think.
Yeah. That's one of those things that it's a weird little quirk, but it's certainly fun to play with every now and then. I know I have a copy of a board game, Dragon Strike, that actually includes an elf as one of the character concepts that you can play. You've got a warrior and an elf, and then a dwarf. So they're fun to play every now and then. Yeah,
and then I got Brendan's other question for you here. What is your favorite flavor of character / NPC to create and or run?
Oh, gosh, that's such a hard question, too. Let's see. Ask it of me again, and I'll see if I can give you a good answer.
Okay. We'll let you give you some time to think. Mine might also be a hard question, because as anyone who has listened to this particular show for any length of time, is we don't softball around these parts, Josh. Welcome to the lion's den.
I'm ready.
Is how do you think your writing has affected how you run games in positive ways?
That's a good question. So one of the things that I try to do in my writing work is give characters and players honest options that are not always combat oriented. So the traditional sort of challenge that you would put in front of a group of players in a traditional D&D game or something like that is, hey, here's a conflict scenario, go out and destroy it, celebrate that you destroyed the thing, and move on. But in my writing work, I've spent a lot of time trying to find ways to put challenges in front of players that require them to think around it so that conflict isn't necessarily, or physical conflict isn't necessarily the answer to whatever the problem is that they're facing. It might be a completely valid direction to go in if there are no other options, or if they're facing something that is clearly a monster that there's no way to communicate with it. But there are often times where I'll put in scenes and scenarios where there is a moral question of, is it okay to just kill whatever it is that is attacking me? What is that, the implication of that long term, and how is that going to come around and bite me in the future if we just take the murder hobo angle on this? So that's one of the things that I try to integrate into all of my games now, is that there's this sense of a question of what is the right direction to go in with this. And I think I've learned to do that through the writing work that I've done in the industry over the years.
Okay, that'll bring me to another question I have then that you just made me think of. How do you work through and how do you create, and what inspires some of your moral dilemmas in games?
So I try and think of what's realistic. You know, if you encounter a group of, let me use an example from a forthcoming adventure that I'm going to be kickstarting here pretty soon. There is a dungeon that you go into, effectively. There's no other way to describe the initial part of this adventure, but there's a dungeon that you go into, and you see all of this information on the walls, and all of that information leads you to believe that what is going to be inside this temple or this dungeon is going to be a demon of some sort. So for me, I like to look at real world cultures and say, what are things that people make misinterpretations of? What mistakes do we make when we're interpreting archaeology and information from other cultures? And then how do you turn that into a decision that needs to be made in a game? And if you are looking at these things in this dungeon and you're assuming, oh, this is evil, this is clearly a story that's telling us about this particular type of demon because of the types of images or motifs that you're used to from your own culture, and then you find out afterward that what you were seeing was completely misinterpreted, it adds some really interesting moral questions when you have that sort of like clear, this is a complete like misinterpretation of a cultural element. I don't know if that answered your question, but that's sort of the direction it took me in.
All right. Do you think you're ready to answer Brennan's tough question, or do you need more time?
Oh, okay. So ask me the question again so I can answer it.
All right. What's your favorite flavor of character/NPC to play/run?
I think the favorite one, there are two that are my favorites. The first one is the creepy villain. The villain that is really powerful and twisted and has a completely alien view of reality. This might be a Zamisi in Vampire the Masquerade. It might be a Black Spiral Dancer in Werewolf the Apocalypse. It might be an Aberrant in Trinity Aeon. Whatever it is, I really enjoy playing the creepy doctor or the creepy villain that is just so outside of human understanding and morality. I find that particularly fascinating and enjoyable to bring to the table for my players to have to try to figure out how do we interact with this thing and then weave our way around it to get to wherever we need to go. Either we need to kill this thing or we need to figure out how to work with it long enough to get away from it. That for me is one of them. And then the other one is a completely different direction. I really enjoy playing characters that are, or NPCs that are slightly dull in that they are maybe like very wise, but not necessarily particularly intelligent, or that they're not really good at either of them. And I enjoy kind of being that that type of NPC that's just kind of like, I don't understand why you are doing X, Y, and Z. That could just be a ton of fun for me to play. So either one of those two extremes, the completely alien, evil, twisted creature, or the fairly dull NPC that you're just like, I'm not sure why this guy doesn't understand why we're trying to buy a sword from him. Those two extremes are the most enjoyable ones for me.
I do enjoy a good stranger in a strange land every now and then. With like the last episode of the Werewolf game where there's a Get of Fenris, Arun, Lupusborn at a Glasswalker rave moot. And they're doing the Scream Your... Yeah.
It's such a fish out of water situation.
And they have the mic of Scream Your Truth, like you see in the first edition Glasswalker book, which was one of the ideas I actually really liked from that book in particular.
Sounds awesome. I haven't gotten a chance to listen to that episode yet, but I need to.
And they're going off and they're yelling and they're screaming, and then so they watch him get up, clearly disgruntled, just marching towards like the thing, and they're all like, oh no. And he grabs the mic and just goes, it's too loud. And that was his truth.
Well, that is a truth. So it's a good thing that they shared it. It's better than the Child of Gaia like talking stick sharing situations, I bet.
Yeah. And then he chastised the Glasswalkers in their own sept, going, you disgust me. You claim to want to embrace the wild, but even your time to be spontaneous is scheduled.
That's amazing.
But then he goes, wherever it dwells, whenever it breeds, I will fight for this scab so it doesn't fester.
How do the Glasswalkers take that?
They are like hurting for people. So they're like, okay.
We're just gonna roll with this. And
also, it's a real little known fact. Denver actually has some of the highest Asian American populations in the country. And so I decided to split it between Glasswalkers and Stargazers, saying it creates that interesting dynamic where you have a tribe of the Weaver and a tribe that is not for the Weaver in any way, shape, or form. Probably just a little more for the Weaver than the Red Talons, which is saying something. Right.
You don't think that the Stargazers are... See, for me, I've always seen them as very Weavery, in so far as their view of reality is one that is kind of like a structured system, and everything they do is about control and balance and so forth and so on. So while they're more wild than the Glasswalkers, I do see some interesting like Weavery influence on them.
I could see that. My thought is that, at least my interpretation of the Stargazer Tribe book when I actually read it for the first time after your guys' episode, was that they actually believe in like 1,000 paths to truth. And so they believe you have to be disciplined, but they believe the road to discipline are completely different because truth is truth. And so Gaia is the immutable thing, in that the Weaver is the illusion that there is only one path of progress, which is why I view them as a more anti-Weaver tribe.
I think that's an interesting way of looking at them. I find the Stargazers both fascinating and completely bizarre, so it's definitely good to hear other people's opinions on them.
Yeah, and I've done several tweaks to the tribes, as you've probably heard in the episodes, to make them a little more, I wouldn't say realistic, but certainly more approachable and less 90s edge.
That's always good. It's definitely necessary to do a little sanding of the edges of the different tribes to make them a little less edgelordy.
Yeah, especially first edition get.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the Fenrir are something else, particularly in first edition.
Man, I'll be interested in your opinion when you get to it in Werewolf the Podcast, but I'm revisiting the revised book for the Get of Fenris, and it is so much better. Jesus.
Yeah, it's immensely better. I absolutely love that book compared to the first edition book. The first edition book, I pick it up and I go, who, why, and what were you thinking when you wrote this? And it would be great as an antagonist book, but as a player book, I was like, oh no, please don't.
Yeah, like there were some ideas in there I genuinely thought were good ideas, like the just a couple of things like the split for World War II and like how they're ashamed, and kind of the warrior, some of the warrior culture stuff wasn't too bad, and because they haven't gotten to certain parts of the meta plot in my current game, I didn't want to hand my player the revised edition book so that had spoilers in it.
Right. So
I did that, and I'm like, no Swords of Heimdall. I don't think I have to tell you, but just in case, no.
Yeah, I've heard bad things and read bad things about the swords, and I'm so glad that in revised they destroyed them, because I absolutely, one, I hate their name, and two, I hate the fact that they existed in the book to begin with. But yeah,
I thought they would have been a good antagonist to bring up in the book, but the fact that they're a playable camp, I thought was a stupid idea.
I went to go hang out with the Black Spiral Dancers or something like that, then I would have been like, all right, I can, see that as an antagonist group to utilize, but not as a player camp.
Or even so, I've gone on record in saying I don't necessarily have a problem with players playing fascist characters but there has to be certain conditions. One, it's either a redemption arc of some kind where they actually have to face up to the horrors that they have done and actually try and do some sort of restorative justice for that.
Yep.
Or they lose at the end.
Yeah, either one of those. Like, I could see the redemption arc being a fun story to, like, have this character, like, slowly break through their prejudices and be able to, like, learn and grow from that. Or hey, we're gonna end up punching you a lot, and you're just gonna have to deal with that.
Yeah, my idea, like, for a Sword of Heimdall character would have been like, if they're failing, what it would be is they keep fighting worm beasts, but they never notice that they're generating worm beasts in the Umbra through their hate and their white supremacy that creates banes that leak off of them, and at the end they are cornered by spirals and banes, and they see everything they fought for was for naught because they were part of the problem.
It's a good arc.
And it's a powerful arc, I think.
Yeah.
Because no matter your intentions, if you come at it with any sort of supremacy notions, you will destroy what you claim to protect.
I think that would be better run with an NPC, though, because I'm just thinking that as a player, and I can just imagine having player choices making me grind my teeth together and being like, all right, I guess that could be a choice that your character would make, but it would just get frustrating pretty quickly, I think.
Oh, I can see that. I could also see it as a short one-on-one game where they know that there is a definite end.
Yeah.
not railroad necessarily, but, an ever-narrowing corridor as their terrible choices narrow what choices they can make later on.
That's a good idea. I always like a duet game for digging into things that you couldn't otherwise do with a bigger group, so that might be a direction to take it in.
Yeah, I also do, because I do for the podcast occasionally one-on-one games as well, and get those recorded when either people miss or it makes logical sense. Like the epilogues after B fell to the spiral.
Which is awesome.
I actually, speaking of the cultural thing, not to take several steps back, missing the cultural parts of things because of your own iconography from your own culture.
Yeah. Do you have a question about that, or were you trying to?
No, it reminds me of something. I made a vague book status on the Facebook page about it, but what happened is I was reading the Glasswalker first edition Tribe book, and they mentioned the kaiju films as like being very pro-worm because they're powered by nuclear energy and destroying things. And because I love the ever-living shit out of those movies, I'm like, you goddamn idiots! It's pro-environmentalism! It's anti-nuclear! What is wrong with you?
Yeah, way to completely miss the whole point of most of those movies, particularly the original Godzillas and everything. It's clearly nuclear testing is bad. This is what's going to happen if we test nukes in the water.
And if you actually go even further, because there's old school 1950s manga, almost tie-in manga for the original Godzilla that came out, decades after the fact. But they actually show Godzilla with smooth skin before he gets bombed, so his skin is supposed to be radiation burns.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's even more a morality tale of you're going to hurt this thing and make it really angry, and then it's going to come out and destroy everything.
Exactly. So that was the one thing in the first edition Glasswalker book where I'm like, what? You didn't even need to research this. It's not subtext. It's the text of the goddamn movies. It's
probably someone heard about Godzilla but hadn't actually watched any of it.
That's my best guess.
Which is fair, I suppose. If you've only ever heard secondhand about Godzilla, I could see you making that misinterpretation.
I suppose so. Actually, let me think. What have you been reading or watching recently that have been inspiring some of the games you're running?
So I have been reading a lot of werewolf books, incidentally, but not playing too much of them. The other thing that I've been reading a lot of is Eclipse Phase. So Eclipse Phase is for folks that might not know, is a far-ish future, or nearish to far-ish future sci-fi horror game that is amazing. It's a D100 system, and the post-apocalyptic transhumanist philosophy behind that game has been a big inspiration for me for Trinity Aeon, which I've been running at various conventions and things like that, and just this idea of what does it mean to be human when you can change forms and things like that, change your body, change what you call your morph or sleeve in Altered Carbon. So I've been watching a lot of Altered Carbon as well. And that idea of just shifting bodies is super, super interesting to me. And it's something that I find influencing the type of horror games that I run, that this sense of what does it mean to be you if you are moved from body to body. Some body horror is something that I always find fascinating.
Okay. Have you ever watched Ghost in the Shell? The actual original anime?
Oh yeah, a long time ago though, so I couldn't tell you much about it, but I definitely remember watching it.
Okay, that's asking very similar questions, so I was wondering if you drew inspiration from that as well.
I've got to go back and rewatch it because I've got the twinkle of you saw this when you were like 14 or 15, and that was more than a couple of years ago. So
Okay. The movie is both Ghost in the Shell anime movies are still excellent, and Standalone Complex is still an excellent series.
I'll definitely have to go back and dig into them when I get the chance.
The second season, though, is one of those ones where you're like, I know this is a good show, but there's clearly like a lot of politics in this for a country I'm not engrossed in their political system over.
That happens, yeah.
So there's just references going whoosh right over my head. So going back and rereading a lot of these Werewolf the Apocalypse books, what is something you think surprised you going through them all?
Ooh, I think the biggest surprise was how, and this is going to be really harsh, but how poorly written a good portion of them were, from late first edition to mid second edition. It was clear that White Wolf was saying, we need books and we need them now. And they weren't really determining what would be a quality book and what would be a coherent book. And that was a surprise to me, because I remember that Werewolf being this really well-constructed world and everything seemingly made sense. And I realized that I had cherry-picked the books that I had read over the years. So the ones that I had picked and read did make a lot of sense, and the ones that I had ignored tended to be the ones that were all over the place content-wise. Okay. So it's interesting to go back and realize, like, some of this just they threw everything at the wall to see what would stick, and some of it worked and some of it just didn't.
Yeah, because I started on Revised, actually.
Same. I started like real tail end of second edition Revised was when I started playing, and then reading a little bit of the earlier books later on.
Yeah, I started in Revised, and Revised had already been over for years. I actually started on the Forsaken and went backwards.
Oh, wow. That's got to be a different way to get into it, because if you're coming from Apocalypse to Forsaken, you can see all the sharp edges in Forsaken that are like, oh, this is what they decided to keep from the old game. But if you're going back the other direction, I bet that was a totally different transition.
It was, and there was one thing me and all my players commented on our first Werewolf game and going, wow, all these monsters' names are like 10 times easier to pronounce than Forsaken, where it's like, wow, there's like 5 consonants in a row. So we did notice that. We actually did call the Delirium Lunacy for our very first Chronicle still, because that just made more sense to us than the Delirium.
Yeah. It does make more sense as a term, honestly. Like, Delirium is just quite fit in the same way.
But yeah, we started on my gaming journey was 3.5 right out of high school. Played that for about 2 years, and then I got into Exalted 2nd Edition. And then I got into World of Darkness, or the new World of Darkness, now Chronicles of Darkness. We started off Mortal, and then we switched over to the Forsaken. And then my player, who got me into Exalted, and by that I mean he didn't stop like hyping up Exalted and telling me to run Exalted for like months on end, started doing the same thing for the Apocalypse. And so I went back, I found an old Revised book, started reading it, and that's how we got into it. And I'd told that to told that story to one of the old White Wolf guys, because I was running Vampire, and I'm like, and then I got into Vampire and all the other games, and he's like, really? From Werewolf to Vampire? Because I don't remember who it was either, so, and I don't want to call anyone out, but he's like, to go from Exalted to Werewolf, that makes sense because they're both action-y games, and D&D to Exalted makes sense. But Werewolf to Vampire, from going to a kind of hack-and-slashy game to a social game, and he works for White Wolf, so I didn't want to be that, like, uppity fan that went, the fuck are you talking about? There's so much social in Werewolf.
I think that's the thing that people forget. Even people deep in the belly of the beast forget that Werewolf is inherently a social game, too. So, yeah, I hear you.
The Red Talons Revised Tribe book actually has my favorite line in the entirety of the entire Werewolf the Apocalypse line to this day. And it was, it's the second chapter where it's a Shadow Lord, Hamid, pretending to be a Lupusborn, trying to learn everything he can about the Red Talons. And he explains his first experience with them when it gets to how the Red Talons feel about the Shadow Lords. And it was, ouch. The first reaction I got from a lot of Talons when they heard my tribe was, what does he want?
That makes sense, though. The Shadow Lords always want something, right?
Yep, and it's one of my favorite lines because it plays up that bluntness of the Red Talons that I genuinely love.
Yep. The Red Talons, I think that particularly in that revised tribe book, are one of the more interesting tribes in that it's so weird to get into a wolf's mindset and understand what does it mean to be a wolf and how would they approach things. And I think that tribe book does a really good job of actually demonstrating how to play a wolf in a good way.
I think so too. I also think it's very cool how it goes out of its way, and it's kind of subtle in places, not so much in others, in that it shows how big of hypocrites the Red Talons are, because no matter how hard they try, they cannot divorce themselves from their human side.
Right. Yeah. Ultimately, they still have that half human side, and they have to live with it and deal with it and interact with it.
Exactly. And I really like how the book deals with that and how the Red Talons refer to their wolf heart and their human mind.
It's definitely good terminology.
So yeah, I'm hoping they keep the Red Talons pretty well intact for Werewolf 5th.
Yeah, I'm definitely intrigued to see where they're going to take Werewolf 5th edition in the development cycle. It's definitely a game that I think when there's lots of challenges and there's lots of potential pitfalls that they could run into. So we'll have to see where they take it. I've been on a couple of different podcasts where we've talked about what different things we'd like to see and what directions we'd like them to go. But I'd like them to really take a solid look at what make Werewolf good and what makes it an interesting game and adhere to that those principles. And if they can catch that lightning in a bottle, then they're going to be good. But if they go off and they try and do something that's completely different or doesn't feel like Werewolf, then they're going to lose a lot of people. So we'll have to see what happens.
I agree with that. Looking at the writing crew that they introduced in their video, I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I'm definitely hopeful with the folks that Hunters Entertainment have brought to the table. So we'll see what they can do with it.
I'm unfortunately not as hopeful for Earthblood now that the gameplay trailer came out.
Yeah, I saw it, and I don't know if you got a chance to listen to the interview with Outstar on the World of Darkness News the other day.
I didn't. I was at work.
Yeah, that's fair. I got a chance to listen to it, and I'm hopeful that it's going to end up being a pretty decent game because they were talking about, yes, it's going to be a bit of a Dark Souls kind of game or a God of War style kind of fighting game, but there's going to be a lot of depth in this story. And they were talking about some of the spiritual elements and the different ways you can approach everything in the game, and that you can approach things as a Lupus or a Hamid, and you don't have to necessarily destroy everything as a Krynos to be successful. And they're only going to have those three forms. But I'm hopeful that Earthblood is going to be a good game.
That's fair. Just from the trailer I saw, it was just like, from the when he was in Krynos, yeah, it looked very Souls-like. The wolf, it almost looked like the wolf and the human were almost like stealth sections, and the Krynos was, whoops, stealth is optional.
Yeah, I think it's just going to depend on what your particular direction you're going to take in the game is going to be. They were very forceful to say, no, it is possible to play this as a stealthy or charismatic character. So
that's good. That's very good to hear. Because I saw that gameplay trailer, and the one thing that hit me is, because when I watched the cinematic trailer, I was hyped. Like, I felt it, like that, the musical choice, the artistic direction, the showing of the Umbra and that creepy, like, vine tendrils of, like, blood and sinew around the worm taint, and all that stuff in the Umbra. I'm like, yes, and then I didn't see the Umbra at all in the gameplay trailer.
Yeah, that makes me wonder what they're going to do with the Umbra in the game. I'm both hopeful and a little nervous, so I don't want to. I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but I'm going to wait and see. Hopefully, they come out with another gameplay trailer before the game drops, and we can see what they're going to do with it from there.
Yeah, fingers crossed. So, I'm curious, Josh, what are some of the games you are currently running, if any?
I am actually not running a game at all actively at the moment, which is probably the first time in like 5 years that I have not been running a game, at least like somewhat. I technically have a 5e Curse of Strahd game, very modified Curse of Strahd game that I have on like semi-permanent hiatus while I'm waiting for my players to figure out how we're going to do the Zoom sort of video game, video conferencing running setup. So we'll see if I can get that back on its feet. But right now I'm playing in a couple of games, which I'm very excited about. I'm actually playing in a Star Trek Adventures game and a modified Changeling game run by the folks at Walking Away from Arcadia. So getting to play in both of those games is very, very fun.
That sounds very fun. I do like the 2D20 system for like Star Trek and things like that.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about it really before I started playing Star Trek Adventures, and I am so blown away by how well designed it is that I want to like steal parts of the system and use them in other games, which is not the type of person that I tend to be. I usually try to play a game like as it is and just roll with it, but I love the 2D20 stuff that's in Star Trek Adventures. I think it is so super well designed.
And I know it's a little different than the 2D20 stuff for Conan, but there's enough mesh over that I just really like it because the other one, Infinity, I think is the other 2D20 one. They have that in the Mutants something.
Mutant Chronicles, maybe?
That's the one. Yeah, that's the one. But Infinity is a very crunchy 2D20, and I'm not a huge fan of that. 2D20, I think, works best with light medium to light crunch.
Yeah, I think that's true. The interesting thing about Star Trek is it's both crunchy and not crunchy. Like, it has very narrative game design kind of systems, but then you have ship combat, and ship combat is super crunchy. So it's this weird mix of, like, when you're doing things as an individual, things can be almost like a narrative story game, and then you get into ship combat and you're like, here is a super simulationist crunchy ship combat system, but every player gets an opportunity to actually be involved in running the ship during ship combat. So it's this weird, it's this weird balance of everything.
Okay. I like Conan. I think it's a little more crunchy, at least on a personal level or character level, than Star Trek is. But because that's the one of the games I'm running for Gen Con, Digital Gen Con this year is Conan again. And
that's awesome. I haven't got a chance to play Conan yet.
I like it. The only issue is that Conan does let you just make completely randomized characters.
Okay.
Which is great for convention play. Unfortunately, the genius that I am, I created a pirate-themed game, so I have to personally design every character to make sure they at least have the ability to swim.
That is probably going to be very important.
And so I've had to go in and do that, and I got to write up the character bios too. That's what this. I'm not running a game this weekend, so this weekend is going to be getting the last of my Gen Con pre-gens created. I got all my Scion ones done. I'm about halfway done with my Conan characters, and then I got to do my V5 characters.
There you go. So you're running V5, you're running Conan, and you're running Scion. Are you running anything else?
No, I was going to run Changeling the Lost 2nd Edition, but when we got asked if we wanted to do all the games we did last time or not, I looked at my Changeling blurb and I'm like, I wrote this on a whim and I have no idea what I was thinking, so I'd like to drop this one.
Yeah, that's fair. It's funny, I was going to try and play some games with the Wrecking Crew rather than run any this year, and everything got filled up almost immediately, so I was like, well, I guess I'm not going to have that opportunity this year.
Oh, man. Also, just as a side thing, I don't know if this happens in Star Trek as much, but for some reason, whenever we play Conan, have you ever noticed that 50% of the rolls end up with a natural 20 at some point?
Yep. It seems to happen in Star Trek Adventures too, where I'm just like, I want a 1, and I don't want a 20 for once. Please stop rolling 20s.
I roll more natural 20s in Conan than any other game.
Yep, 100% of the time.
Like at one point, because you're supposed to do some sort of minor mishap or, get doom for the storyteller or whatever. And at one point, like, I tried to narrate it to make it interesting. I'm like, I can't, just give me doom. Whatever.
I love that it's called Doom in Conan. In Star Trek, it's called Threat, which makes sense, but Doom has such a better ring to it.
Yeah, it's Doom in Conan. I think it's Threat in John Carter as well.
Okay.
So I think they just named it special for at least Conan. It might be Doom in another game too, since there are a couple of them. And Momentum, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah, Momentum makes sense to be kind of standard across the games. It's a good term for it.
Yeah. The only one I'm interested in doing is that will be interesting, I should say, is the rolling of dice for Conan digitally, because the damage dice are kind of interesting for Conan. I don't know what the damage dice are like for Star Trek, because the damage dice I know are distinctly different in John Carter than they are from Conan.
Yeah. Do you have special dice in Conan for the damage dice, or are they like dice that you have to buy special?
No, you don't have to buy special. They're just D6s.
Okay.
And rolling a 1 does 1 damage. Rolling a 2 does 2 damage. Rolling a 3 or a 4 does 0 damage. And rolling a 5 or a 6 does 1 damage plus any effects on the weapon.
Okay. So it's the same type of dice, but in Star Trek they sell special Star Trek dice. So you can get those, and then they have the different things that you do on the die itself.
Yeah, they have that for Conan too. Luckily, the Conan ones, they still have the numbers on there, so you can still use the Conan dice as regular D6s.
There you go.
Which I really like. It's one of the things I was not a fan of for the V5 special dice. Because you can't use the V5 dice for anything else.
Use the dice. Yeah, if I can't use expensive dice for something other than your game, I'm probably not going to get your special expensive dice.
I got them because I bought the I think it was not the Methuselah pack. No, I'm not spending $500 on a game. It was the Elder pack, I think, where I got the core book, both sect books, and the storyteller screen and the dice.
Nice. I had initially purchased the Elder edition as well, and in the kerfluffle that happened with V5, I ended up canceling my order, partially because I realized I was never going to run V5. And there's nothing wrong with V5. I think it's a perfectly well-designed system. I actually think it's a really good system, and I think the storyline is really good. But I don't really have that deep of an interest in Vampire, and none of my players wanted to play. So I was like, I'm going to cancel my order. This is a good time to do it. And it's been good because no one has asked me to play V5 since, so it hasn't been a bad decision ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, that's always fine, you know. I really liked it when I ran I really liked playing in the demo. My first ever Gen Con at the 50th anniversary. I really had fun. Excuse me. And then I really enjoyed running it. That one was a bit of a grinder just because I ran the exact same scenario for every scenario.
Yeah, I ran 5 demos of V5 at that Gen Con, so I understand where you're like at the end of it, like, wow, I have run this identical scenario so many times that I could probably run it blind.
Yeah, but I did have fun with it because each one did end up differently. And each of the player groups that year, I think that was every Gen Con I've had one weird group of people where I'm like, I might have to ask someone to step in.
Oh.
Like, not super bad, like, I don't want to give that impression, but one where it's just like, you're coming a little extra, champ.
Yeah, I could see that happening. Gen Con's got its ups and downs with that.
Yeah, for the V5 game, it was 2 friends in a larger group. And this one was getting a little into it, He's like, I'm going to go in, I'm going to rip out his skull, and I'm going to fuck. And his friend's like, whoa, we're in public. And he was screaming that, or about to scream that, in the gaming hall that we're playing in.
Wow.
And so
I'm glad his friend stepped in at least.
Yeah, I was just like... And then so we got to a break and I'm like, I might have to ask someone to come over. This guy was about to skull fuck someone in my game.
That's absolutely like my STX guard moment. I'd be like, nope, I'm done. Stop.
Done. Yeah, and I didn't have that. I actually didn't even know about those mechanics going into that Gen Con. Mechanics I wish were in the core Vampire book, not just the PDF.
Yeah, supposedly they're in the reprints at this stage. So
are they? Okay, that's good.
That's what I'm hearing, people. Yeah.
And the other one was during Changeling the Dreaming, and it was 2 guys who they didn't understand the sensitivity of issues. They thought that there were those people who make fun of themselves, but as a consequence, they make fun of everything else. And I had some people who wanted to go by they, them pronouns. They were very explicit in that their characters were non-binary, agendered, things like that, and they started writing pronouns. And so one who was a she, Unseelie, was thinking of going, how about my pronoun is your majesty? And I'm just like, oh, fuck. As it's just them 2, and then everyone else at the table, it was like a creaking door as all their heads turned at them with daggers in their eyes.
Ouch.
And I had to go later on, just break everyone. And then I went over and I'm like, so here's the situation. How did this happen? Everyone came together at the end of the game. Like, people picked up that these guys...
Can be great.
Yeah. They picked up that these guys weren't being malicious. That it was ignorance, not maliciousness.
That's
which
like something, but still.
Oh yeah, no, I asked them to stop, obviously, and they all got like kind of a little rapport with each other and things like that. So that was nice, at least.
Yeah, that's good.
So I'm wondering what's going to happen this year.
I look forward to talking to you post Gen Con to hear what your stories are going to be. Because being online, even, we'll have to see how things go.
Yeah. So back to you real quick then. What would you say? I know Werewolf is. So would you say Werewolf is your favorite World of Darkness game?
It's my favorite World of Darkness game. Yes.
Okay. What would you say your second favorite World of Darkness game is, and why?
Mage, and it's really close. It's really close between Werewolf and Mage for me. Werewolf is my favorite because I love the balance of anger and spirituality, and Mage for me is this balance between philosophy and spirituality and the complex nature of what reality is. I love those sorts of questions in games, so Mage and Werewolf are really, really close.
Makes sense. So now, I think you know what I'm going to ask, since you were very explicit in saying Werewolf is your favorite World of Darkness game. What would you say your favorite game is?
My favorite RPG of all time is Aberrant.
Okay.
Aberrant First Edition was the game that I played every time I got a chance to when I was in my early 20s, and I love it and would run the heck out of it. It was actually the first role-playing game I ran while I was in the Army. I ran a game of it while I was in Korea, and I talked a whole group of people into playing who had never played RPGs ever before. And I am super excited for second edition because it's my favorite game of all time.
And you'll have enough story path systems under your belt to hopefully pick up on everything.
I'm hoping it makes a lot of sense, and hopefully I've run Storypath enough that I'll be able to pick it up and just run with it.
What would you say as advice to anyone listening for getting into writing for their favorite games, including Storyteller's Vault, DM's Guild, or even spinning up a third-party thing or pitching themselves to smaller third-party publishers like High Level Games?
The best thing to do is write, which I know is a cliche sort of thing to say, but write up something. Write up a monster, write up a villain, write up an antagonist of some form. Do that and use that and polish it and make sure it fits everything that you want it to look like, and pitch that to a game company and say, hey, I created this monster. I'd really like to write up maybe some more about it. What do you think of this? Or you can put it up on the Vault or the Storypath Nexus or the DM's Guild. Things like that. One, people buy them because they're always looking for new monsters and antagonists and villains to use in their game. And two, it's a good, easy path to get started with something. If you do one or two at a time, you can build up a whole little booklet of them, and then you can put that out, and you can see what people like about it, what sort of feedback they give you, and grow from that. But I'm also, when at High Level Games, I'm always looking for people to write up creatures and monsters and characters. So being able to look at someone and say, hey, you can do good stats is something that I'm always going to kind of like find that person later and go, hey, you submitted X, Y, and Z to us. I think that was really good. I need some more of this. And then I'm going to get that person to do more work on that project.
Very cool. How do you think it is? I don't know. How long have you been writing for games?
So I've only been writing for games for 3 years now, but in that time I've worked for 6 different companies and published over 100 different products on various community content, or been involved with over 100 products on various community content websites.
Wow. It's impressive. Because I was going to ask, how do you think self-publishing or getting into RPG writing compares now to when you started? But I don't think that question's valid.
No, the only advantage now is there's more community content. Even 3 years ago, there was only really the DM's Guild, and the Storyteller's Vault was just barely starting. In that time, there's been an explosion of community content sites. So now there's the Call of Cthulhu community content site. There's a community content for the Cypher system. There's community content for pretty much every major system that is out there. So I tell people, build some community content. It doesn't hurt for you to take the game that you love the most, whatever that game happens to be, see if there's a community content site for it, write something, and see what sort of feedback you get from people on it.
Very cool. I keep getting reminded that I wrote something for Call of Cthulhu around the time that opened up, and I keep seeing downloads for it. And I'm just like, oh, cool, thanks.
It's awesome.
I've also noticed if you look it up, people tried running it online, apparently. At least adventures with the exact same name.
Did they create a virtual tabletop adventure?
No, it was just like little mini convention digital get-together things.
Oh, cool.
I just see Pikmin's Legacy joined this many slots, and I'm like, hey. And then on the drive-through, it's got like 4-point-some stars, which is pretty good. But then I saw someone actually write a full-out review with like 3 stars and 3 out of 5 stars. I'm like, thank you. Every criticism, I was just like, absolutely what I thought.
Yeah, that's always the worst. Because whenever I get a review in, I'm always nervous. I'm like, okay, let's see what the star rating is, and let's see what the actual review is, and hopefully it's a 4 or above, because 4 or above doesn't seem to hurt sales. A 3 is always like, this could hurt the sales of this product.
Yeah. I think most people look at the average, I think, though.
Yep, it seems to be that way.
Because, I remember you reaching out after I did the Snowhaven review. And he's like, yep.
I was really happy with your Snowhaven review, by the way, and I think all of your critiques were completely valid, and I appreciate all of them, and it's actually got me thinking about some different products that we're going to be hopefully producing to fix some of those holes that you noticed within the Snowhaven setting. So
good. I'm looking forward to it. I do like Snowhaven. It is one of those settings, like most settings, I would just pick apart and insert into other games.
Yeah, which is what I expect most people would do with it. It would be awesome if people are running it directly from the book, but I anticipate, particularly with the way 5th edition is, that people are just going to steal bits and pieces of it, and I think that's totally cool.
Yeah, I think there's only 2 settings that have inspired me enough in all of D&D history to want to run exclusively that. And there's a third one that I'm playing with, but I just got to actually run it before I know if I want to and sit down and read it. And that's Eberron.
Mm-hmm.
And the Primeval World of Thule.
Nice. Yeah, Eberron is one of my favorite settings of all time, and it's such a coherent setting that I think it's easy to want to run that straight from the book, as it were.
Yeah, and it's designed in such a way that huge elements of it don't function without the setting that was built around it.
Yep, completely.
All right, Josh, we have one last really big question for you.
Okay,
and it's
ready for it.
And it's the final big question. It is the big question we ask everyone on the show, and it is, if resources, time, people, etc., if nothing was an issue, what would your dream game be that you could run if nothing was an issue and you just had the ability to do it?
So the dream game that I would run in that scenario is actually a game that, weirdly enough, I pitched out in the world at one point, where I said, hey, I want to run a D&D game for Stephen Colbert, for Deborah Ann Wall, Kevin Smith, and Will Wheaton. Those were all the people I said I would love to just run a D&D game for these folks. And incidentally, every one of those people has played D&D since then, and a couple of them together. So that it may be taking the question in a different direction, but that's the game. If there were no challenges on making it happen, that's the thing that I would do.
All right, perfect. Hey, Josh, where can people find you? And if there's anything you want to plug, now's the time to do it.
Sure. So right now, Snowhaven for 5th edition, Pathfinder 1st edition is on sale for 25% off on DriveThruRPG, so please go and check that out. You can find us on highlevelgames.ca. That's highlevelgames.ca. Yes, we're Canadian. I'm sorry. You can also find me on Werewolf the Podcast on Podbean or any of the podcatcher programs of your choice. Or you can find us on Twitter at Podcast Werewolf or at HLG_corporate and talk to us in any of those places.
Perfect. Thank you, Josh. That was Josh Heath. I'm Keegan. You can find us on Facebook, Podbean, YouTube, Apple Podcasts. We even have a Discord now, and I will drop that link in the description below. But you'll never find me on Twitter. I find it a cesspool. Have a great day, everyone.